Welcome to today's Supporting the Artists by Closing the Margins panel with Toronto Arts Council and Tangled Art and Disability. I also wanted to note that this session will be recorded and made available for public viewing. If you do not wish to appear in the recording, please keep your camera turned off. We're also supported in today's session by Tony, who is providing closed captioning services. Before we begin today's conversation, I would like to acknowledge this virtual space in which we are gathered and our panel discussion is being broadcasted on, being the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory in which we are broadcasting is subject of the Dish with the One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. As settlers and artists on this land, it is our duty to uphold these treaties and understand how our art interacts and impacts this land and upholds the collective wellness of the original land. Today, we're joined by our four panelists. Max Ferguson has been practicing art since 1996 and received his BFA from the University of Regina in 2001. He graduated with an MFA in Interdisciplinary Studies, Visual Art, and Women's and Gender Studies in 2017, and is currently pursuing a PhD in Art and Women's and Gender Studies at York University. His artistic explorations involves disability studies, gender, neurodivergent and transqueer sexualities, activism, the body, surrealism, and psychoanalysis. Max has also worked with a variety of media, ranging from the computer-based works and ready-madeness to painstaking, graphite, and digital collage. His current work revolves around the hybridized notions of photography, sculpture, sound, installation, and performance involving the psyche, the body, activism, queer theory, and mental health. He is also a published poet, writer, holds a degree in journalism, and has worked as a political, legal, military, and arts writer in 4 different provinces over the past decade. Thank you and welcome, Max. If you'd like to say a few words.
I'm glad to be here and I'm glad to contribute to this really important conversation. So thanks for inviting me to be here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Next is Heidi Prasad, who is a Toronto-based cultural worker, artist, and plant enthusiast. She's a recent graduate of Humber College for Arts Administration and Cultural Management and holds a BFA from OCADU. Her art practice is driven by her passion for storytelling, sustainability, disability justice, and accessibility. She has exhibited in Canada, Berlin, Korea, China, Brazil, and Finland at universities, not-for-profit galleries, and alternative spaces. Heidi is currently the manager at Tangled Arts and Disability and is on the Visual Art and Design Foundation Program Advisory Committee at Humber College. Welcome, Heidi.
Hi. I think for accessibility purposes, I'm just going to do a self-describe of a visual description of myself and the background. So yes, I'm Heidi Prasad. My pronouns are she and her. Currently, I have dark brown hair, and I'm of Indo-Caribbean descent, and I'm wearing pink glasses that I call Babysitters Club chic. And I'm wearing a t-shirt that says out of office that you cannot see, and I have a green shirt blouse on, and my background is of like white kind of beigey walls. So that's about it.
Thank you, Heidi. Next, we have Kevin Reigh. Toronto Arts Council Creative Communities Program Manager Kevin Reigh has 15 plus years of experience in the arts and not-for-profit sector, having previously worked at Dance Immersion, the Canadian Music Production, Rights Agency, and Unity Charity. Kevin has also founded Mosaic Grant Writing, plus Creative Communications to help independent artists and smaller not-for-profit organizations navigate the world of grant writing and proposal development. As a writer and spoken word artist, Kevin has released 1 album, Ground Provisions, and 2 volumes of poetry, Love and Universes, All Things, and Bedroom Bully, and has collaborated with numerous musicians and dancers through the Greater Toronto area. Kevin's work was included in T.Dot Spriots, an anthology of Toronto's Black storytellers, and he has continued spoken word to Paranoid Jack's The Last of the Funky Cyborgs. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think I'm going to follow Heidi's lead here and describe my appearance and background a little bit as well. In the background, we'll start with the background, which is a nice beach scene from one of my favorite places in the world. It's a beach called Frenchman's Cove, water, trees, very relaxing. I'm a he, him pronouns. that I use. I'm a gentleman of Afro-Caribbean descent. My glasses aren't as funky and stylish as Heidi's, but you know, I think they're pretty stylish. Got a white collared shirt on with a floral pattern. Yeah, so that's that for the description. But again, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. And last, we have Timaj. Timaj Garad is the Outreach and Access Program Manager at Toronto Arts Council. She's leading the development of Toronto Arts Council's new Black Arts Funding Program, in addition to supporting outreach activities and improving accessibility across the organization. For the past 15 years, Timaj has been performing, facilitating workshops, and creating events as a spoken word artist and a singer-songwriter, alongside her community, working to support Black artists, newcomers, youth, and persons with disability. Timaj is deeply passionate about creating greater access to the arts and amplifying artists in Toronto's underserved communities. Welcome, Timaj.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm also going to be pulling from Heidi's, I guess, inspiration to visually describe ourselves. So I am of East African, Ethiopian descent. My background is sort of like I guess, pink walls, a couple of mirrors, probably too many mirrors, a bookshelf, and some art hanging on the walls. I'm wearing a light pink hijab or headscarf, head covering, and a floral top. And yeah, thanks for the intro. Happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And my name is Kais. I am the Interim Public Programming and Partnerships Manager at Work in Arts. We are a multidisciplinary arts organization that promotes a greater understanding of mental health and addiction issues through creation and arts. And also to describe myself and my background here, I'm sitting in front of a white but beige-looking wall due to the light to my right. I'm currently wearing a black polo shirt. I am of East African and South Asian descent. I'm wearing 2 white headphones so I can hear for the audio support. I do not have any glasses or any jewelry on me as well. And at times you might hear some background noise, which is the fridge or any of the neighbors upstairs. Thank you, everyone. And so this panel focuses on supporting artists by closing the margins rather than to continue to work within the margins themselves. So it is a recognition of the ways in which we must continue to work towards ensuring that we center the voices of our communities that have been historically neglected or not fully represented or supported. As we're currently navigating a pandemic that has further impacted and affected marginalized communities disproportionately, I'd like to ask, as the Tangled Arts and Disability Gallery, as well as the Toronto Arts Council, what are your key areas of focus and reprioritization of programming initiatives and funding opportunities for artists in response to COVID-19? Anybody would like to start? Heidi, would you like to start with the first question?
Sure. This is Heidi speaking. Oh, that's a good question. Those are some of the questions that we initially started within the beginning of the pandemic is how do we center our community and our artists, and how do we do that? And it was quite hard. A lot of the times, like, we had to close the gallery because of COVID, and we wanted to center our community first in regards to health and safety, and basically we felt as though like we had to take a bit of a step back and allowing that time to breathe and a little bit of room that goes with that, and not necessarily overtly spamming and creating content for the sake of creating content. So with us, it was really focusing on ourselves and trying to focus on our community. And I found that like through that it stemmed our podcast, Crip Times, which was hosted by, I believe, Christina McMullen and Caleb S. and Yusuf Kadori, and they centered around conversations within people with leaders and community leaders, talking a little about what they've been doing during the pandemic. And again, like when it comes to the operations and programming, it's really been interesting. I guess just trying to provide our community with the support and trying to provide our community with just the opportunities that they would have in physical realm, but like transferring that into the digital realm has been something that has been a combination of a challenge, but also something that we've been kind of striving for is providing that support. This is it. Thank you.
Max, would you like to add on to that? What has your experience been like as an artist and a curator?
That's a really good question. I feel sheepish. I want to describe myself like everyone else did. I got so nervous I completely forgot. So just as a primer, I'm wearing a black hoodie. I am actually a mixed Indigenous white descent, but I am white appearing. I have blonde hair and a goatee and a beard. And I just wanted to sort of get that out of the way. And there's a lovely painting of a house behind me that you can kind of see, and it's kind of folk artish looking. Okay, with that out of the way, I think like adding on as a curator and an artist. I mean, I'm coming from sort of the other side of it. I'm asking, you know, what types of accessibility issues have arisen as a result of this pandemic, and I think for me, one of the things that I'm always thinking about these days that I wasn't taught about in art school is just that, you know, the assumptions we have about art and our history and making art are very, very ableist, and they center around a white, very patriarchal way of being. And we memorize those, we internalize them, and that's supposed to be our guidepost. But what's happening now, I think, if anything, I would say this pandemic is exposing structures, and particularly social structures around issues like classism, division, minority, and politics around necropolitics, bodies, and things like that, that we have not acknowledged. And so even though this pandemic has not been a fun ride for anyone, it certainly has been an agent of exposure that will help us, I think, to call out and discuss maybe these issues that maybe we've been avoiding because we don't know how to talk about them. So even though the pandemic has been very difficult, I do see it as an opportunity to bring up these difficult conversations, difficult knowledge and issues that we normally don't get a chance to discuss in the art world. Like for me as an artist, these are interesting times, and I think this is reforming the whole world, and the art world and its extensions are no exception to that. So what I'm thinking of is just how are we going to make both art and the artist, because art comes from the artist, and we often forget that when we're mining, mining information or art from someone. That it does come from not just these patriarchal white male bodies, but also from, you know, a diversity of bodies and experiences that I think can really enrich things. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to put it first. So that's what I'll say. I hope that's a good start.
Thank you so much, Max. Timaj?
Yeah, so to add on to some of what was already said, I think that the pandemic is also exposing and further exacerbating some of the disparities that already exist, and in terms of how disproportionately affected marginalized communities and marginalized at various intersections are, not just throughout the pandemic, but also specifically to COVID-19. We've been looking at how it's affecting art practice, and that equity-seeking groups are definitely disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in terms of work, in terms of the ability to sustain themselves and their organizations. So I guess in terms of our response, we did have COVID relief funding to artists. We are also just looking at generally accessibility. How do we create access and opportunities in a time of intense precarity? How do we look at models of funding that also target the ability for folks to sustain their work? How do we look at how we're evaluating our programs to get some more community input? So the program that I'm going to be managing also sort of started during this pandemic year, and that's the Black Arts Funding Program. And again, this is not a program that is launched yet, currently in the development phase, but even in the development of this program, I think that the pandemic has had a huge impact in how we are looking at that process of even just developing a program, and the priority to really look at, equity of access in terms of applicants applying to programs, and also looking at co-design of programs, what's our relationship with the community, how are we engaging artists and just the general public in terms of being able to access supports. And so these are a lot of the things I'm thinking about as I'm sort of developing the Black Arts Fund, which has, I think, from the beginning been very much kind of a community co-design process, having lots of conversations. We had consultations with artists from the Black arts community over the summer, for example. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say, because I want to leave some for Kevin, just in case you want to touch on anything.
Thank you, Timaj.
Yes, thank you, Timaj. Yeah, I want to preface everything I say here this afternoon with a kind of caveat, because there are going to be times when I'm speaking from the perspective of Kevin, Reigh, the individual, the arts administrator, the artist, and times when I'm speaking specifically with a TAC lens. And I will try as much as possible to make it clear when I am speaking from, because I don't want to say, express things that are actually my personal opinion and make them sound like they're TAC's opinion. So I just want to make that clear. Now, regarding the COVID response fund, I just want to talk about that for a second. I think it highlighted, Timaj mentioned that, the pandemic, really highlighted and exacerbated the existing issues and inequalities in the, the society we live in. And I think our COVID response fund is a good example of that. I was one of the points of contact for that fund. So if you were looking for information about it or parts of processing claims for the fund, I was one of the folks you would have to speak to. And one of the things that became very clear to me very soon is that, even though this is anecdotally, we haven't crunched all those numbers and I can't give you the exact stats on everything, but a significant amount of the people, or significant portion of the people who, applied and received funding, we left it open, any artist living in Toronto, self-employed artists living in Toronto could apply, is that, the most vulnerable artists within our city weren't the ones accessing this fund. I had a lot of conversations with folks who heard about the fund because their agent told them about it, or their manager, or, things of that nature. And, if you're in the position, and I'm not, generally speaking, if you're in the position to have a manager or an agent, you're working in a different milieu, different means, different access than, a lot of artists who, for whatever their, wherever their identity positions themselves within the matrix of our society, it prevents them from accessing these kind of funds. So, it was something that, it was a very helpful fund. We did help a lot of artists, but it also laid bare some of the issues with, the funding system. And, TAC as an organization is really well equipped to give out grants. And that is about it, in my estimation. We are getting better at addressing the inequities, at addressing accessibility and all the type of issues that we're going to be talking about today. But, this was one of the takeaways for me during this pandemic, is we are really equipped to do just this one thing. And are well equipped to do this one thing. Everything else are things that we are learning and we are getting better at, or trying to get better at. On a more personal note, because part of the question, as I understood it, was, how, you know, the kind of things that helped us, you know, cope with the current situation. And I will say there was quite a bit of flexibility for us to work from home or work in spaces that were comfortable for us. They're very early on in the pandemic, that was the case for us. You know, so there has been that ability to kind of maintain your own personal equilibrium and sense of personal health. So that is something I have appreciated. Another bonus, you know, or learning during this process is really the importance of having focused and targeted outreach. And I think, you know, Timaj joining our team partway through the pandemic is part of that. You know, being able to, one of the things that I think was a issue for us in terms of being able to outreach is that as program managers, there's so much administrative burden that comes with the job that it's hard to then also pivot and do the kind of necessary outreach to build those relationships with the communities that you ideally want to, you know, build those bridges with. So, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic, I suppose, with, you know, folks like Timaj being on the team now, that we'll be able to improve our outreach to the vulnerable communities that we haven't been really accessing historically.
Thank you, Kevin. And in terms of technology and access, how have you folks found technology to have enhanced access and visibility of artists? And we've spoken about this just a little bit, but then also, what are some of the ways in which technology has become a barrier of access?
I guess I can speak on this one first. And I like the caveat that you issued, Kevin, of sometimes TAC, sometimes you're speaking as an artist. I am going to adopt that same kind of approach. So in terms of what TAC has been doing, and accessibility wise, I think technology has really kind of provided an avenue for a lot of people who can't access physical spaces, or that the physical spaces are not are a barrier to access. So I think that has allowed individuals who are experiencing those physical barriers in space to be able to access technology. I also think that you know, like we've done things like Instagram lives, for example. So technology, especially social media, there's a permanence to it. So I think that instead of, you know, going out and kind of doing an information session, we can also just direct people to an information session that was done that kind of lives on our not our website, but it lives on our social media forever. And that makes it a little bit easier for people to access information at a time that's appropriate for them, and to be able to share information as well. So I think that that's been great. And I'll speak, I guess, as an artist, or just as someone who's observed what technology can potentially support with is outreach, is to be able to, you know, we talked about, or Kevin mentioned, the necessity to kind of outreach to groups that are not necessarily, or individuals that are not necessarily connected, that are further marginalized to the point where they're not even aware of certain services, they're not able to access certain services that we might provide, and opportunities. And I think technology offers a platform where we can then kind of, you know, through the kind of sophisticated networks of social media, be able to tap into new collectives, organizations, artists that are maybe not connected with us yet. And then some of the ways in which it's been a barrier to access is that not everyone has the same digital literacy. Not everyone has access to internet connectivity or to a stable device. So there are a lot of those kind of barriers in terms of being able to access technology in the way that you need to for, let's say, a conversation like this. Like, you need to have pretty stable internet connectivity. You need to have a device that you can like plug in and rely on and that kind of thing. So those are some of the other things that I've noticed there.
Thank you, Timaj.
Hi guys, this is Heidi speaking. I'm just gonna speak a little bit to what has been said. Yes, I agree with Timaj in regards to the some of the enhancements of technology in regards to access. It's a lot of the things that we've been using at our organization, and again, I'm speaking from both the organizational point and also from my own personal experience as an artist and a person with lived experience with the disabilities. So except for me, like the technology, it does enhance access to a point where, yes, we don't necessarily have to go into a physical space. From my own personal experience, I'm now that barrier of transportation is now been removed for me. So it's the difference between trekking into a city that's for like a 2-hour travel down into the city versus being able to be at home and to have like moments where I can have meetings that are set up throughout the day. And also the idea of relaxing space and relaxing digital space as an access feature. So I can turn off my camera and just listen and drink water and walk around. Like, there's certain aspects of that in regards to accessibility that it has been great. And also even the features of like having closed captioning in a meeting and having transcripts that can be provided as notes towards the end of those things, or like, again, an access feature for myself. And visibility for artists, allowing artists to have the, like, not necessarily have to ship their work, but being able to post their work online is another component of technology and access. I think some of the barriers that I've noticed as an artist, and some of the barriers of technology is that, yes, there are systemic barriers of technology. Not everybody does have access, and because of COVID, things have been removed in a sense where hubs like libraries that once had people coming in for free Wi-Fi is no longer there for use right now, and certain hubs for like coffee shops and places that we would normally go for free Wi-Fi is something that isn't necessarily there. And to think that people actually do have, like, that technology is accessible to everybody when there can be financial barriers is another thing. And also, yes, literacy and what happens if the access is there and it's not being used is another feature. So the infrastructure of technology is something that can be a barrier. So like, let's say if you have, I was talking to my partner about this, and he was talking about accessible programs and in regards to coding, and what happens if it exists but it's not being implemented as an infrastructure. Then that's a barrier in itself. So those are some things that, yes, we have access to certain components of technology, but there is still room to grow, and there's still going to be like, it's not the end all means. And I guess another thing that I wanted to add, I'm sorry if I'm going on little tangents, is what happens, like some of the questions that I have for myself is in regards to barriers of accessibility, is that if you have platforms that hinges on privacy and those are the only means of things that we are using, that can be a barrier in itself for those people that refuse to engage with it. So again, there are so many factors in regards to technology that is not necessarily being spoken to, but can be a barrier, and it's quite interesting that these things exist, and yeah, I'm hoping that conversations can be engaged and developed. Yeah, thank you.
I'll just add on to what Heidi said, because I really feel that one of the main issues around technology is that it is grafted onto capitalist structures these days, and marketing and money and progress. But what is that? I mean, ultimately, it is a classist system, and no one wants to own that, because when the internet was founded, it was a revolutionary space. But of course, as marketing and technology and all of this started to push together, now to engage with technology and the internet is to engage with, you know, capital worth and what your capital worth is as an artist. And that is a heavy thing to have to hold when you're already dealing with issues of accessibility, disability, and all this other stuff. So, you know, technology is wonderful. It's allowed me to see concerts in people's homes that you wouldn't normally get to see. It's allowed, you know, and through the pandemic, we've had to engage with things like virtual exhibitions and stuff like that. But I'm at odds with it too, because in engaging with it, I'm forced to engage with it as an artist, as a professional, as all this stuff. But yet I don't agree with the hierarchies and how these hierarchies get in the way of work being seen, or, you know, all of the strange little hierarchies that go along with that. So for me, I mean, to engage with computers as we have almost been forced to, whether we have money or not, whether we have the means or not, you know, it's become a fact of life, and privacy issues have been invaded and all of this stuff, and it's complicated. So, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out the perimeters of the conversation that I need to have with both myself and others around this. I struggle with it because I think one of my roles personally as an artist who's also an activist is to call out, you know, these structures and how they are, and what we need to do to make them more accessible, but just also to acknowledge the lack of humanity that sometimes gets pushed under the rug in favor of, you know, reducing people's lives to nothing more than capital. And it happens, I think, to all artists. I mean, what's often said is, you know, what is this worth? We have big, you know, labels and headlines about how much a piece is worth, and, you know, yet we don't often talk about the lives behind that worth, or what that meaning is. And I think one of the great things about disability arts and this type of conversation is it kind of exposes that again and allows us to kind of look at, okay, how are artists engaging with the world? How are they engaging with these structures? How are they engaging with it, you know, through this concept of ableism and talking about it? So I think, you know, it's not a cut and dry solution. Maybe there isn't really a solution, but we do have to engage with the inequalities that technology offers and that it brings to light. So that's where I'm sitting with technology right now.
Thank you. Max.
I don't really have much to add to this conversation, but I do want to thank Max for bringing up these issues around capitalism and consumerism and hierarchies. I will say that it's an ongoing conflict and you know, tension I feel for myself, with myself. How does it, what can I do? What am I supposed to be doing when, you know, to help, you know, address these inequities that we keep talking about? How do I do that while working within a system, working for an organization that, you know, it is part and parcel of the same system that is so problematic, you know, and it's an ongoing tension that I don't know how to resolve with myself. And, you know, so I just want to thank Max for bringing that up.
And which segment?
I did want to add something actually, also to Max's point, and I want to thank you because I've been thinking about this a lot as well in terms of, you know, technology and social media, I think in particular is what I think about a lot, is a classist system, but the algorithms are also designed to keep us constantly engaged and to reward, like actually reward people that constantly engage. And we're talking about engaging in various ways every single day. And, you know, I think I was reading something like if you don't respond to a message in like an hour or something, that your post gets viewed less or something like that. There's a whole, it's, when you really kind of look into it, it's very intentional because obviously they want the ad sales. They want you to look at advertisements so that they can make money off us. But this also leads to a lot of marginalization, for further marginalization for folks who have a disability or who have mental health barriers to be able to have the capacity to engage in that way. And that's why a lot of folks will, who have the means and are able to, will hire like a social media manager. And that's like one of the only ways to really keep up that level of engagement. But obviously that, you know, there's a barrier with people who don't have the financial capacity to be able to afford that. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of add some of the practical ways in which that further marginalizes people that are already experiencing barriers.
Thank you, Timaj. And so this also leads to the next question being, in terms of program and project development, how have you structured your outreach processes and centered the voices and needs of the equity-seeking communities and folks who are currently within the margins? And what does you know, building trust look like for these communities on an ongoing basis who are being outreached to?
I'd like to say a couple things. Address this first, I guess. You know, to a significant degree, I think arts councils, arts funders have not been doing sufficient outreach and have not centered the voices and needs of equity-seeking communities. That's just the harsh reality, right? You know, to address this, you know, a few years ago, I think it was 2017-ish, maybe 2016, Toronto Arts Council, you know, went through this whole range of consultations that ultimately led to the creation of TAC's equity framework. And this equity framework is designed to impact all areas of Toronto Arts Council's operations. So, you know, how our board composition, hiring, granting processes, the composition of our committees that make the funding decisions, and the peer review panels. And, you know, within this framework, TAC also has identified equity priority groups, which, you know, there's 4 groups that have been identified. So we have BIPOC, well, Indigenous individuals, Black individuals, queer communities, anyone along the queer continuum or spectrum, as well as folks living with disabilities or having mental health challenges. You know, and within this equity priority policy is a mechanism for how applications are assessed by our committees and our panels that make the funding decisions. So, you know, it's a little bit more complex than what I'm about to say here, but essentially when it comes down to assessing applications of equal merit, the application that's speaks more fully to one or more of our equity priority groups is going to take precedence. You know, and that's how it works in the project stream. And then within the how organizations that receive operating funding, how they are assessed, there's, you know, a percentage. It's now 20% of their assessment is based on, you know, how well they address equity and inclusion. You know, so that's what TAC has been doing for the last you know, few years. But I also think, you know, so that is the TAC answer, I guess. But as, you know, kind of the Kevin, the individual answer is, I think it is fine to say you want to be more inclusive or you know, whatever terminology you want to use. But I think without being, or let me take a step back. When you start to talk about, okay, we are going to address these kind of inequities, implicit in that is recognition that you too were also inequitable. You too were also part of the problem. Mm-hmm. Now, if using that as a starting point, if you're not able to specifically identify what areas, you know, the areas that you were deficient in, what your where you need to improve, you know, if you're not specifically able to say we were inequitable in these kind of ways, if you can't say those things specifically, then it is hard to also address them. It is hard to then create specific solutions for these problems. Right? So I think TAC has done a pretty good job of opening its eyes to some of these issues and starting to address them. But I don't think, and it's not TAC specific. I think it's sector-wide, system-wide, that it's easy to talk about these things. It's easy to use the right language. It's easy to say we're going to be, moving forward, equity is important. Moving forward, we want to prioritize being more accessible. We want to prioritize disability. We want to prioritize mental health. It's easy to say those things, but without specifically, being able to say, well, these are the things we did that contributed, and this is how we're changing. And it's a little halfway, and I'm going to stop my rant right there and say, having said all that, which sounds like a little doom and gloom, not to keep bringing up Timaj, but I do think Timaj's hiring and the scope of the role that position that she inhabits, is a good step towards making those kind of the kind of substantive changes that I was talking about. I know Timaj referenced the kind of consultations that TAC participated in ahead of trying to develop this Black Arts Fund. And I hope and expect to see more of that moving forward.
Elizabeth?
Yes, hi everybody. How is everybody today?
Good, and yourself?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry, I had to apologize for having to excuse myself a moment ago. I was listening to what Timaj has to say and Kevin, and I've had an idea in my head for some time now. I used to be a caregiver for my grandmother many years ago, and as well for my mother. Now, with my mother, I ran into a very difficult situation, and I really didn't have a voice, and neither did my mother. And she ended up going to a home, and she did very poorly in this long-term care home. And my idea is that I would like to write a book called For Those Without a Voice. And I would also like to fund a charity by the same name, because I also struggle with mental illness. And I think this would be a great idea. And Timaj, listening to Timaj, she gave me an idea about this. And I don't know how I would begin to go about this. I also struggle with a lot of barriers around technology, and I have an iPad, but sometimes I even have trouble navigating it. I'm getting better, but I really struggle with a lot of these things as an artist. And I was wondering if anyone could offer any suggestions or advice.
Yeah. A little bit moving forward to other questions. We'll be getting into an audience discussion, and then we can have more of those conversations and what we can do as artists and administrators to create more of that accessibility support. So there will be an opportunity later on for questions.
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of the workshop. I apologize for that as well.
No worries.
Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I saw, was it Heidi? Did you unmute yourself at one point? Or I missed who wanted to follow up after Kevin or Timaj.
I think I unmuted myself to answer the question, but then he said, so I'll table that for later. But thank you, Elizabeth, for asking that question. Can you actually repeat the question?
Sure.
Your question?
So the question was being, in terms of programming and project development, How have you, as the TAC, as an organization, conducted outreach initiatives to equity-seeking communities? And what has it been like to, on an ongoing basis, establish trust within those communities?
Well, I think, again, like Kevin said, my role was really created out of the need to do more of that at the TAC. I think that we absolutely can do a better job. And, we're seeing that equity seeking groups there are barriers to accessing our grants in general, in terms of the way the system is set up, in terms of the language in the guidelines is not fully accessible. And we're working on sort of looking at how we can make it accessible, both in terms of language, but also accessible for deaf, mad, and disabled artists as well. We've been having lots of different conversations and consultations with community, as well as sort of dialogue within our staff. And we're hoping to kind of, work in partnerships with organizations like Deaf Spectrum to get a better understanding of what are the needs of the community, the deaf community in this example, that we are currently not meeting, and how can we do that better? I think being in a fully digital space now has made us really think about our digital accessibility as well, and our website in particular. We will be making changes to our website and launching a new website that is hopefully, addressing some of those accessibility challenges. But again, we are also continuously in need of more outreach to folks that we're not hearing from. And it's sort of like sometimes a case of you don't know what you don't know. But in my role, I'm really committed to kind of reaching out to folks that have zero engagement with TAC, because those are the voices that are currently not being heard from, and currently not included in sort of our wider outreach. Even when we do consultations, we're typically reaching out to our mailing list, whoever signed up for a newsletter, or previous grant applicants, folks that have sort of a page on our portal. And those individuals, organizations, and collectives will already have had some engagement with TAC, which already means that there's a certain level of access and awareness of our programming. So my role is really kind of just to make those new connections with people that have no idea who we are, or also feel like they don't trust us. Maybe they know who we are, but they don't want to engage with us because we, at the end of the day, are an institutional funder. We're this huge institution. I think we really need to and are working on our approachability, accessibility, in terms of having the community understand that we, at the end of the day, are here as program managers to support you, to understand how the programs operate, to understand how you can be successful in writing a grant application. But I think there's a misconception that, that support is not available. So even, looking at what we can do better and improving that, but even looking at what we actually have in place and how do we change the image and the perception so that people can feel more comfortable actually accessing the services that we have in place. We also have things like, accessibility support grants, 500 for folks that need access with application writing, and then we have about 5,000 available that folks can apply to support accessibility needs for artists that are part of their project. And that includes things, like ASL interpretation, attendant care, et cetera, right? So again, not everyone knows. So I think we need a better job of actually promoting the services that we do have, but at the same time, working on access across the board in all of our programs. You asked the question about, I think you mentioned the consultations, or someone mentioned the consultations. And I want to talk really quickly about the difference between consultation and co-design, or continuous kind of collaborative approach with community. Consultations can be, just a one-off, hey, what are your needs? It's a needs assessment, right? It's kind of an environmental scan. What do folks require and how can we kind of support? But what I think really needs to happen, and what I've what I've been trying to do with the Black Arts program is really start to shift our thinking into actually co-designing programming with community. And this means like continuous consultation and continuous communication and transparency about how things are happening. And I think that's actually something that's really essential to building trust. So again, this would be like a pretty big change for a funder, but I think it's something that TAC so far has been receptive to. So we're starting to kind of make those changes in increments.
Thank you, Timaj. I'd also like to give an opportunity to either Max or Heidi to respond from your perspectives as either an artist or a curator. What have been like the essential factors of trust that you've had to have, Max, if a funder has reached out to you for research initiative or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm being who I am. I'm naturally both suspicious of the environment I live in and yet have to function in it. What I love is being able to have the conversation or being even open to the conversation, because we all know it's an imperfect system. It's never going to be an ideal because we're dealing with so many things. We can work towards a better understanding and hopefully that's what we can aim for. But there's always going to be some things that, are not completely correct or accurate or whatever. And the point is, it's that openness. I mean, I seek open communication. And an open discussion of the parameters and acknowledgement of those weaknesses if they're available. I think we're all kind of tiptoeing around certain things, at least in the past when I've had to apply for things. For example, having mental illness that's hospitalized me before. I mean, I can't openly discuss that with just anybody. I can't be like, okay, well, the reason I didn't make it down to XYZ was because I actually had a psychotic episode and I can't talk about that with just anyone. But so I've in the past, like through art school, when that would happen to me, I'd have to make up something or I would just minimize it or gloss over it. I think one of the great things about having these open conversations is acknowledging the realities that some of us face. And for me, being able to have that conversation and not be told like, or, just feeling like, what if I get judged for this? What if I, because of the ableism? So, I mean, that's an example, like even at openings and things like that, I've had to kind of, at my own openings, I've had to disappear sometimes, even though I like talking to people because I get overwhelmed. And I've never been able to have those conversations before. So being able to have those conversations with someone and opening the door to, how flexible things can be is a starting point. As far as from a curatorial perspective, I just go back to people, have lives and stories and histories, people outside of these institutions. And it's good to be compassionate about that. I was reminded by David Garneau, who I'm working with right now, that the root of the word curator is care. And I know we're going to get into that a little further down the line, but just caring, and not just kind of using someone as a box checking device, as a trans guy, and that's who I am. I mean, often if I come out to people and I talk to them about it, a lot of the time they're more receptive, especially now because I look like a white guy and like I look like an average white dude. And if you saw me walking down the street, you probably couldn't even tell I was trans. And the thing is, like, you need to have these conversations and open up about the assumptions we make with language and these institutions, because language makes assumptions too. So there's all of these things that it's just important to be aware of whenever we're engaging with the art, with the artist, with each other, with institutions, with administrators. It's just having that awareness as an institution. And you can feel it when you walk into a room, you can tell that people are concerned or if they're just kind of glossing it over. And yeah, we all need to work on it, right? Like everyone does. Everyone's part of it. So that's what I'll say about it.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks.
Heidi, did you want to add anything? Or?
Yeah, thank you, Max, for that. It's true. Like when it comes to our organization, we're coming from our lived experiences, and our outreach is coming from a level of care. We have a comps team that really considers and takes into consideration of like who they are outreaching to, and that's some of the things that we're thinking about firsthand. Like, where or who it's going out to, and the transparency that comes with it. So those are things that are often on the back of our minds, and also like, yeah, building that continuous trust and building those relationships and continuing those relationships. It's not necessarily a one fit, like we're not in it for checkbox, like creating a checkbox. We're there because it's our experience, it's our lives, it's who we are, right? So it's that understanding about that, like I guess it's that understanding that it's our community, and we want to be engaged with them in a variety of ways. And sometimes it can be as simple as plain language and the image descriptions. And it's understanding that we have a lot of care and compassion when it comes to those conversations. Thank you.
So much. And this now leads into, again, curation as care. And this is something that Max had touched upon around the care and the ethical practices that we, should approach as organizations and as, galleries and institutions and funding bodies. And so how do we ensure that our efforts as organizations practice care and person-centered approaches? And what I mean by this is, how do we ethically, again, collect information about demographics, community members, and to avoid data mining artists and communities? How do we reintroduce, again, that humanity factor? Because again, tracking, obtaining data is important because it lets us, gauge where our progress is and where we're currently situated within the process. But how do we still maintain that humanity and not exploit communities further?
I can speak to that, and I will. I think it's a difficult conversation, first of all, and difficult conversations are hard to have. People get uncomfortable, and it's important to kind of understand that the discomfort is just part of it. And, I know when, for example, with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in various provinces around issues of Indigenous oppression, I think, those conversations were hard to have, but people had them. And they acknowledged that it was a hard conversation and that things still needed to be said. And I think that we need to kind of work through and become more skillful at managing discomfort, conflict, and things that are hard to deal with. And I think as humans, we tend to want comfort, and I think knowing that, I know for me, having to be the person who often is leading conversations, whether it's at York or whatever about some of this stuff, like I'm usually the one that, puts the thing on the table and then stands back. And the thing is but with the understanding that, conflict resolution and becoming more skillful at it is a key, and that understanding that conflict is just part of human society and life, and that we have to learn how to acknowledge what's actually happening. And I think it starts with the person and with people, and with understanding that artists and the system that creates and manages artists and the history that governs artists and that governs the art world is exclusionary and has boundaries that are constantly fluctuating and have become more liquefied as a result of technology and everything else going on in the world right now. So just starting with the person and being like, I'm not just interested in the product. I'm interested in you. Who are you? Because your life is relevant. It's important. It has a meaning. It's attached to it. And I really see art as an artist. I see art as an organic product of an artist's life. And when you reduce it to capital to the level that it does, because of course, you hear that old myth, I'll only be able to do anything with this when I'm dead. Some of my friends in school, we had an ongoing joke about that, and I mean, it reduces. So knowing that, and then what can we do to acknowledge the living of an artist, the life of an artist, the lives of artists while they're alive, and to acknowledge that they need support and that they need help and that it is a way of being, and I think we need to acknowledge that it's not just a job, that it's actually a way of seeing and being. And I tell that to my students, that it's not just, well, how much is this going to be at the end? People ask me, how much is this painting going to be worth? And it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. But what about the life of that person. Get to know the life of that person, because it's probably very rich and everyone has a story, and we need to kind of acknowledge that too. So, I mean, that's where I'm starting with my curatorial practice, and I don't profess to know everything, but I'm learning as I go. And it's a really wonderful thing to be able to help in that regard. So that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
This is Heidi speaking. I'm just gonna, thank you, Max, for that. I'm just gonna touch a little bit on the second portion of that question. I was pretty humbled to be working alongside of our research coordinator at Tangled, and some of the things that I've observed firsthand was their consideration of care and ethics from the get-go of the beginning of researching, and that's something that's often kind of forgotten. So and I don't mean that as a general statement, but it's something that should be like a practice of best practices. So thank you for that question. One of the things that I've noticed right off the bat was the transparency that comes involved in like transparency involved with the reason why you're gathering this information, and being honest and upfront with the people that are participating in those in that research. So the understanding of like why it is you're doing it, what are the intentions of this, where it is a go. Those are things that were talked about firsthand, like right at the beginning. Another thing that I noticed, like, you know, like paying the people for their labor, and making sure that their voices are heard, but they're actually getting the payment for their labor, and providing a variety of accommodations during that practice as well for research gathering, and respecting their access needs during the whole process. And then also in like, if it's something of ethics, like if using that as a tool of relationship building, and inviting them into conversations in the future, and keeping them in mind for future engagements, and providing them with more opportunities, is something that I've noticed firsthand with the ethics of gathering those research, and whether or not they want to be anonymous, or whether or not they want to be credited. Like those are things that are often kind of thought of during this whole stage. So I was really just overall impressed by those practices that were used by our research coordinator, Victoria Warner, who is a powerhouse. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Timaj or Kevin?
So in terms of the second part of the question, honestly, Heidi, you said everything I was planning on saying, so I don't have much to add. But I think it is important that it's voluntary, that it's transparent, that people know what they're signing up for. You know, a lot of the times, in terms of the ways that the questions are being asked, it can be very convoluted on survey forms for people to understand. So making sure the language is simple and accessible, so that people know what they're answering, and are able to kind of obviously get through it with ease. And then conversation should not be extracting, and there needs to be a follow-up, like, where did this information go? Like, how is it being used? And of course, paying people for their labor is a part of respecting people's times, and making sure that, you know, we're being kind of equitable, and understanding that the feedback process, especially like when you're doing a consultation or a focus group or an interview or something like that, it takes a considerable amount of people's time and mental energy, and that's a form of labor which should be compensated. So really kind of focusing on that. And then everything that you said, Heidi, in terms of accommodation and respecting folks' access needs. I think building relationships is key. And we talked about outreach before, and I think that that's part of the reason why outreach seems very disingenuous sometimes, right? Because people are not focusing on building relationships. It's like, let's do this info session. Hey, let me reach out to you to tell you about something. Okay, so what else are you doing for them? Even as a funder, there are things that we could be doing in terms of, you know, showing up and really caring about those artists and what they're up to, keeping up, using our platform as an opportunity to spotlight them and highlight what they're doing, and really just kind of keeping that relationship going, and in an intentional but also an authentic way. And yeah, I think that's everything. I mostly echoed what Heidi said, but hopefully I added something of value.
You did. Thank you.
I would just like to add one thing to what Timaj was saying about what an arts council, what we can do to support artists beyond just providing grants. And I think, Max, when Max is talking about, or one of the things I took away from listening to what Max had to say was the whole idea of like looking at the individual holistically, their entire life, right? Not just considering, so from a TAC perspective, not just engaging with that individual, that artist at the moment, that transactional way when they're applying for a grant, right? Like how can we as an arts organization support artists beyond providing grants? Is there space for us to do that? And I think one of the ways that we can do that is through advocacy. Advocating for policy, advocating for practices that benefit our communities. And a recent example of something that TAC has been doing is our support for a basic income guarantee. Our leadership supported a letter, or provided a letter to the federal government as part of their budget consultations advocating for a basic income guarantee. And, so I think things like that are ways that TAC can, demonstrate, whether you want to call it leadership, whatever fancy term you want to put on that. I really look at that as looking after artists as individuals, the lives of the artists that, are the backbone of the communities we serve.
And so leading to the last question before we open it up to the audience members for their questions as well. So conversations around mental health disclosures, specifically for QTBIPOC, MAD, and deaf communities, members within our communities, face a higher instances of discrimination, dismissal. And so in that case, how do we as organizations expand our understandings and capacities to support artists living with mental health and addiction struggles and disclosures?
I'll address that first. I think as an organization, one of the things TAC has been trying to do is recognize those areas where we are or have been lacking. From my estimation, one of the realities is that we aren't equipped. The vast majority of staff members aren't equipped to let's say you're engaged in a conversation with an artist who's experiencing certain issues at a given time. Well, most of the TAC staff members aren't trained, practiced in the kind of techniques or that are helpful in those kind of situations. So we have started to have internal training around things like that. Timaj, you haven't experienced that just yet, but we have had kind of consultants come in to work with us in terms of developing skills, techniques that we can use to and I think this ties in with the previous question as well, provide care for folks in those kind of situations. Yeah, so I think that's one area. And then frankly, me personally, I find participating in panels like this, like I think I get more out of these than, maybe I'm wrong. I think I get more out of this than, the folks gathered. Because I'm always, someone always says something that makes me go, that's something I need to think about. That's something I need to bring back to the group. That's something that we in TAC haven't considered we can do better. So, I think it's a two-pronged thing. One, recognizing things we aren't doing well, finding the supports we need to improve that. Secondly, continuing to have conversations like this. Yeah, I always learn so much from these.
Thank you, Kevin.
Just to add to what Kevin was saying, and I also agree. I think this is a great opportunity, and to kind of learn more and get more perspective and have those important conversations. And I think that since I've been hired, I've only been in the role for about 2 months, but I've been attending a lot of these types of conversations and events, not necessarily as a speaker always, but even just as a participant. And I've learned so much from them. And I think just being open to and agile and flexible with the way that we provide our programming, but also with the way that we engage, understanding that this is a big piece of the work, is to continuously do the work as people that are in positions of power and leadership and privilege in terms of being funders. And so that's been something that's really essential to me as I navigate my role in terms of being the outreach and access program manager. We do have like some supports, again, like I mentioned, $500 accessibility support is kind of really geared towards folks that are having difficulty with the application process, perhaps, because of a mental health challenge or disability. And that is funding that's available to work with a support worker to support in completing the application. Now, I will say though that this has limitations, and this is one of the things that we're learning and exploring at TAC, is that some folks, they need more support than what $500 will get you, right? So how do we then look at actually structuring the application so that it's supporting the most possible people, or ideally everybody? So that could look like different ways of submitting. And now I'm talking as kind of Timaj, the artist / TAC, because I don't want to misspeak and say that we're definitely going to implement certain things, but it's something that I feel strongly about, that artists should have various ways of submitting their application, and various kind of supports available to them in terms of potentially grant writing clinics and conversations around the whole process, because there needs to be a demystifying as well as a simplification of the whole process. It looks very bureaucratic, it looks very difficult. So those are some of the things that I'm starting to think about in terms of what can be done at TAC.
Thank you. Max or Heidi, if there's anything you'd like to add, don't have to before we open it up for questions.
Well, I can add from the artistic. Yeah, I'll just add to the artistic side of it. Like, I think one of the problems too is that often high functioning individuals are the ones that get rewarded with these grants because they can camouflage. Like, that's how I survived for years. Like, I would have a bad day with my mental illness, and the next day I'd have an interview, or I'd have to go talk to someone higher up than me. And because I could camouflage what I was dealing with, I would get rewarded for that. So it became a way of functioning, masking my conditions, plural, and my neurodivergence as a way of getting through what I needed to. And the reality is, as an artist, I don't see the world like a lot of people, that abstraction is more natural to me than language, and that I'm kind of an oddball in that I can write. Most of my friends aren't writers, don't do multiple things, and so I'm in a weird position, because I think, could I not write, could I not camouflage, I probably wouldn't be here. I would probably be in really rough shape. And I've been rewarded over the years, and it's not until I got to Tangled that I was able to openly articulate that, without fear. And so, I think it's important to acknowledge that these systems often reward a certain amount of masking and high functioning, which isn't really functioning, as a way of coping. And it's a problem. And it's something, I think, Heidi, we've talked about it at Tangled sometimes, just in conversation as a group. But yeah, I think, education's important, and just acknowledging that people are struggling, that they look different, or that they feel different, or that they behave differently, and that they have their own experience, and we need to acknowledge that and not treat them like they're different, and push them outside the box because they're not doing what they're supposed to. So, I've learned how to camouflage, and I still do it to a degree. I mean, I still function. I may have an art career, but I'm still me. I just have an art career. I still have mental illness. I still have neurodivergence. I'm still dealing with perceptions and issues every day. And, I think all of us are. And so for me, having the privilege to be able to talk in this panel and use privilege, the white appearance, even though I'm not technically white, and looking like a white cis guy and all the stuff that goes with it, if I can use it to help and to just talk about my own story and by extension other people that I've met, hopefully that sort of will give you that not all disability is visible, and that invisibility is sometimes encouraged in these systems, and that invisible disability isn't what it appears. So I think we need to put that into the access too, not just physical access, but the fact is some of us need big spaces, more time, maybe a different structure to our schedules, things like that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be considered for things. So that's what I'll say about that one. So thanks.
Thanks, Max. Thank you so much for that. and yes, oh gosh, yeah, you touched on so many things that I've had the pleasure of having so many great conversations with Max and our team at Tangled about some of the things that we've experienced with our lived experience. And yeah, like there is a lot of pressure of what it is to be a high functioning person, like high functioning. And there are like so many things to unpack with that and invisible disabilities, because we're both coming from neurodivergent communities and we're both invisible disability identified people, and it can be a bit of a struggle in itself, and a bit of our conflicting access needs or things that are often talked about. I feel like, and this is coming from my own personal experience as a person that came into Tangled, or just like coming into a space that finally allowed me to have the room and the environment to be able to talk freely, is something that it was life-saving and a complete change for how I've felt over the years. And being able to articulate that in a space is something that I feel like I want more spaces like that. And coming as an art administrator, now being in a position where I'm gonna say it, we are gatekeepers as art administrators, and now having that privilege of being able to do the work that we can do, and letting people and allowing people to have that space to have these conversations is detrimental. It's very important. It's like something that needs to be done within arts culture and arts sector. I can only say that, like, for organizations that are having this struggle, yes, capacity. Thank you, Kevin, for saying that capacity is an issue for a lot of these organizations. Do they have the capacity to even provide the support that artists do need, is something that really needs to be addressed with our sector. And I think that sometimes having a third party, or having people that there are people out there that are doing the groundwork and who are, like doing these moments, like having consultations and having these conversations with other organizations, coming in and doing something as simple as an equity audit. Well, not necessarily simple, but something as complex as an equity audit, and really taking a look at one's person's organization and really thinking, what are we doing? And I think, and this is me talking from my own personal experience too, as just an individual, that sometimes you do need to provide the environment, and having that environment where people are allowed to come into your space as patrons, but also being able to work as culture workers is very important. So are you hiring people within the community? Is something, and that's quite important, because that's the difference between someone coming into your space and feeling comfortable, but then also providing the support for those workers is another thing that needs to be addressed within within organizations as simple as that can be a form of access. And yeah, there's a lot of things to impact with it. And I don't think that there is an end all like, hey, this is how we're going to fix it. We cannot fix this. Like, I think this is something that we all have to work together to create a ground, to do that groundwork. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. And thank you for highlighting, again, this is a continued ongoing basis in which we have to address the inequities and also what access can look like. And there's no just one tiered overarching solution for all of these different problems. Thank you. And so now we're at our point in where we're opening up questions to the audiences for folks. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or to use the chat function. I'd just like to acknowledge a few of the comments within the chat. So the first one being from Victoria. Being a new career artist, these are issues I face. It seems that I have a burden to do much of the work on my own, yet I don't have the full capabilities as another. The internet has been useful for me, as I have found artists like yourself so helpful. I am appreciative of this information and don't feel so alone now. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. We're glad that we're able to provide some insight and support on that. And so for the next person, Constanza says, co-designing sounds like a really effective approach. And I still wonder in that process how to connect with the most disconnected, and who and what is the point of contact for times when you are truly living at the margins, and how that can be brought in when art does not always seem like priority. So just taking a moment to just like reflect and take that in. Thank you. A question from Victoria. Can people from the Golden Horseshoe be in contact with the TAC for grant help with the Art Council of Canada? So I think, yeah.
So I guess there are two answers to that, or not really two answers. The Canada Council for the Art and Toronto Arts Council are two separate organizations with, separate mandates and all that kind of stuff. So, contacting us for support or help with the Canada Council grant would not really be useful to you. Having said that, I can't speak for every other program manager at TAC. But I know anyone who sends me an email or gives me a call, whether they're calling about Toronto Arts Council funding or not, I respond to them. And if they have a question, that I can provide some resources for them. So, let's say you're calling about a Canada Council grant, and you send me an email, and I recognize that, okay, well, no, I can't help you. I will try to find someone or something that can help you. So officially, no. The official answer is I guess you shouldn't be contacting me for Canada Council related stuff, but if you happen to contact us, we will try to find supports for you.
Just to add to that, although we don't facilitate in terms of like grant writing or grant writing support, we do have grant writing workshops and that kind of thing. Some of them have been like kind of online, like you can see where we've spoken about grant tips, even in our info sessions for each program and that kind of thing. So you can definitely connect to some of our more like general, and we can do better in providing more of these opportunities, like general grant writing workshops, but that's something that we can connect you to, whether it's like TAC or some other organization. We try to spotlight some other opportunities on our social media and through our newsletter as well. So that might help in terms of resources for grant writing.
Thank you. Question from Elizabeth. I would like to reiterate my question to Timaj and or anyone who can offer any suggestions, support, or advice in terms of me wanting to write a book and start my charity for those without a voice. Thank you.
Yes, hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for your question. So we have literary grant programs. If you're interested in writing a book, there's the Writers Program and a couple other literary grants. I think the deadline is in June, but they have varying deadlines. So I can drop the link in the chat for you to look at the program for that. And I can also connect you with the program manager, who I'm sure would be happy to speak with you. And program managers, like I said before, are really kind of here to help you kind of understand how to navigate the program and how to make your application as successful as possible. So I definitely suggest you connect with her. Her name is Catalina. So I'll drop that information in the chat.
Thank you very much. I'm not even familiar with these organizations. I'm not familiar with TAC, and I'm not familiar with Tangled. I'm learning new things. This is great.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I think this is what all of this is about, is connecting with folks that are not connected with us and vice versa. So thanks for being here.
Oh, well, thank you guys for being here.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. And we have another question from Constanza. Are there any mentorship opportunities? And could they also be dropped in the chat as well? I'm also interested. Constanza, if you'd like to elaborate on what you mean through mentorship opportunities, either for grant writing or on some of the grant programs, just so we can point you in the correct direction. So I was thinking more in lines of your craft. Okay, so from the TAC, what are the outlines of the grant programs that support, again, the different disciplines of artists, from proposal writing, grant writing, just to get a sense of what are some of those opportunities that the TAC offers artists in terms of professional development to their craft?
So TAC does not have any, with the exception, we do have a newcomer and refugee artist mentorship program. That aside, we don't have a funding program specifically designed for professional development, just professional development. However, if you happen to be a dance artist, there is within the dance projects program, there is funding available for kind of professional development with it's within a certain kind of scope. I'm not sure all the particulars, but you can apply to this program, and if you want to take say a dance residency or those kind of things, you can do that. The Creative Communities projects program that I manage, within the scope of the activity that gets funded there, professional development, is often the kind of thing that gets funded there. So if you have, if you have a more specific idea you want to talk to me about, I can, perhaps maybe Creative Communities could be the space for you. But yeah, there isn't a dedicated professional development program at TAC at this point.
And yeah, I think that's it in terms of the chat for questions. And folks, feel free to also unmute if you'd like to, if you have any other questions.
Can I go?
Yes, please.
I'm just wondering about, you're talking about all these applications for your programs and everything. I am from the margins, and is there, are you looking for any specific language from the margins at all, or are you looking for more of the conforming language when you're looking at these applications?
Are you asking the question in terms of creating more accessible language for programs and applications?
Exactly. And I'm wondering if looking at these applications with these words, does that make you more willing to give aid or access, or are you looking for me to use the more common language? I'm wondering about where the levels are, where the barriers are, and how it's sort of functioning with all these things just happening all the time.
Right. So it might be helpful for me to kind of talk about how the funding process works in its totality at TAC. So, every funding program has a deadline, at a given time. We do have one program that has a rolling deadline, one of the visual and media arts project grants. But for the most part, each funding discipline has, a couple deadlines per year. And the application process requires you to create a profile within our online portal called Smart Simple. And when you create that online profile, then you will see the applications that you are eligible to apply for. So you can create a profile as an individual artist, or you can create a profile as a collective or an organization. So, once you've created your profile now and you've decided you're going to apply for a grant, some funders like Ontario Arts Council within the project stream, like there's a one size fits all application. So, if you're applying for a music or dance project, their application asks the same questions. For better and for worse, at TAC, every funding discipline, the questions are a little different. So if you're applying for a dance project grant, or you're applying for a creative communities grant or visual media arts grant, the questions are going to be different from discipline to discipline. So you sign in, you access your application, and you fill it out accordingly. Some fields will have word limits and things of that nature. So once you've applied for the grant now, so the program managers, we don't make any funding decisions. We put together peer review panels of artists and arts administrators and, essentially people with expertise within the given discipline you're applying for. And, they read all the applications within that pool at a given deadline and get together over the course of a day or two to then assess all the applications. They score them on a 1 to 5 scoring framework. And essentially the top scored applications get funded or recommended for funding, and yeah, that's kind of how the process works. So in terms of how you should be filling out the application or going about things to be successful, there isn't really a there isn't a one-size-fits-all way that you should be filling out an application. It's really a matter of answering the questions in as specific and clear a manner as possible. Now that is a simplified answer to the question, I guess, because I think the reality that I think we all have been speaking about in different ways is that historically these application processes haven't been the easiest or simplest to navigate for folks. They're barriers for folks depending on like a wide range of barriers for people applying. We consistently are trying to make things better by simplifying the questions we ask on the applications, simplifying the language on our website and our promotional or outreach materials. But yeah, so that is my long-winded answer to let you know that there isn't really one way that you should be applying to Toronto Arts Council specifically. If you do have a funding program or a project in mind that you have questions about, I recently just put my contact information in the chat, and I would urge you to connect with me, and I can direct you to the program manager at TAC that's best suited for your needs. Yeah, so I may or may not have answered your question. I hope I did.
Alyssa, I think you might be muted if you're trying to say anything. Not hearing or seeing anything in the chat, but thank you, Kevin, for the walkthrough. And yeah, I think we've reached the end of our time together. So thank you so much, everyone, to our panelists, Timaj, Heidi, Max and Kevin. Thank you to the audience members for attending and for your questions and these conversations that are like essential and ongoing. And again, thank you so much once again. There's more programming opportunities for the 2021 Being Seen Public Programming. For the next set of opportunities, we have workshops for professional developments for artists. One of them encompasses grant writing for artists, how to negotiate contracts and fees for artists, and the other one is how to speak and write about your work. You can check those out on our Workman Arts website at workmanarts.com under our current events page. And if you'd like to follow up directly after this panel with me, you can contact me at Kais, which is KAIS_Padamshi, PADAMSHI.com. And the recording will be made available within 2 weeks for folks who did not have the opportunity to attend today to tune into our conversation. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Be well.
Thank you, everybody.